Hello and welcome to the It Depends podcast. I, as always, am your host, Kevin Goldsmith. I've been an engineer, engineering lead, manager, director, VP, and for the last several years, CTO. And in this podcast, we serialize the audiobook of the book I released this year, It Depends, Writing on Technology Leadership 2012 to 2022. And if I sound a little bit different this week, it's because I'm actually recording this on the road. So I don't have my usual equipment. I'm going to do my best to make it sound as good as possible. But yeah, that's why I sound a little bit different. I will say it does make me feel like a real podcaster, though. For those of you that are new to the podcast, one thing to understand, so this podcast comes out every other week. On alternate weeks, there's a newsletter. The newsletter is serializing the text of the book. The podcast is in order in chapters. The newsletter is out of order. So you can actually subscribe to both and get different content. Now that we are most of the way through the book, when I do a podcast that references something that I've already serialized in the newsletter, I'll link to that in the show notes. You can find out more information about the book if you go to itdependsbook.net. That has links to this podcast and the newsletter. That also has links to all the different stores that you can buy the book, and you can buy it in hardcover, softcover, or ebook. For those of you that have already bought it, thank you very much. If you haven't and you're getting value from this, please consider it. It's a great holiday present for those that are looking for things for the engineering or future engineering leader in their lives. If you have questions, if you have comments, you can send them to contact@itdependsbook.net, and I will respond. As I mentioned previously, I've created a survey because we are approaching the end of the book. This week, we're going to do chapter 25 of 36. And so I'm thinking about what happens when we're done with serializing the book. If I continue doing this podcast, if it changes into something else, similarly with the newsletter. That survey is linked from the show notes. I will put a link to it also on the itdependsbook.net website. You can get to it there. It'll only take a few minutes. I made it very, very simple, but it'll be tremendously helpful to me if you have. And for those of you who already have, thank you. Appreciate it. It is anonymous. I'm not collecting email addresses or anything like that, so you don't have to worry about that. This week's chapter is called Transcript of My Speech from OPEX Week Summer 2018. And this is literally that. It's a bit unusual for me in a few different ways. So as I mentioned at the top of the chapter, for a brief period of time, I was granted access to or invited into the operational excellence community. I was aware of it and I was interested in it for a while because it has some overlap with the Agile community. It's different. They take a different approach, but it's this kind of community that you hear about, but you don't know much about. And so when I say operational excellence, if you don't know what I'm talking about, there's this whole school of thought, like Agile is a school of thought. There's another school of thought with its own certifications, its own trainings called operational excellence. I don't know the complete history of it, but when you think about it, you generally think of things like GE, which is where sort of this practice became, and the sort of core certification of this community is the Six Sigma, and they have different levels of Six Sigma certification. So mostly I was aware of this from people honestly giving it a hard time because it's thought of as sort of very, very big company. It comes from GE after all. And I don't think they did themselves any marketing favors by like calling the levels of certification after like karate belts. So if you're a Six Sigma black belt, then you are the top tier. They also have things like Lean, Agile, Six Sigma. But these people tend to come from, the folks who are really involved in this community actually come from oftentimes manufacturing, or they come from these places where the impact of failure is significant. After spending time with these folks, I came to understand really that the operational excellence community comes from some similar ideas or embrace similar ideas as sort of the Agile community. In my head, Agile is all about bringing value to customers quickly, improving the speed of innovation, learning from failure, embracing failure as a key method of learning, and then reducing the impact of failure, which makes a lot of sense in a software world where the impact, you can minimize the impact of failure. In fact, the first chapter of the book is all about that, how to fail well, but very much how to fail. Whereas this community, if you're making satellites or defense systems or health systems, failure is actually a pretty big deal and not something you want to happen. So while the Agile community focuses on failure minimization to improve value delivery and innovation, the operational excellence community is very much about productivity and is very much about efficiency, but it is with a goal of failure avoidance. And so that's where the operational excellence community and the Agile community sometimes are at odds with each other. And I think in a lot of the areas, after spending time for over a couple of years speaking at a bunch of different operational excellence events where I was sort of the agilist in the room, I think that I came to understand it a lot better. And I also came to understand where maybe the Agile community was giving the operational excellence community a bit of a bad name, because while I met people that were working on satellite systems and health systems and what you might call critical systems not to fail, at the same time, I met a lot of people who were working on facilities management and places where it is okay to fail, but they were taking very much this sort of operational excellence approach. That's the place where we might encounter it a lot in the Agile community, where it's sort of applying these ideas in places they don't need to be applied. That seems very heavyweight and very unnecessary to us, which is maybe what has happened. It's gotten a bit of a bad reputation for us. I will also say, though, maybe I never knew how I came to the attention of that first conference that invited me. I think the other events that invited me after the first conference was because I did the first conference. I think I may have come to the attention of the operational excellence community because I was working with unusual companies for me, Philips Personal Health, this company that makes, the 3-story tall dump trucks, and not extended things with them, just presenting to them. I got invited to talk to these groups because they were trying to figure out how to leverage more of that sort of Agile methodologies and lean in their practices. And so that may be how I originally came to the attention of these folks. But I do think there is more that we can do in these areas where failure is like incredibly costly or difficult or challenging, to bring in some more of that Agile stuff. Having spent a little bit of time or a little bit more time with the OPEX community, I think there is some practices of theirs that we may be able to learn from. There are certainly common overlaps. Toyota is a big reference point for both the Agile community and definitely for the operational excellence community. And a lot of those ideas permeate both of these kind of cultures. So they're not as far apart as we like to think they are. I'll also say that experience of going into an area where I didn't know as much about, being surrounded by people that just did this all the time and spending time with them and being curious was really valuable for me. Have I changed things because of my 2 years hanging out with OPEX people? Not significantly, but it does inform me and does help me understand things. Challenging my own assumptions about a different field was really valuable for me. And I really did come away away from that time with a lot more respect for those folks and what they do. I would recommend it to you to every once in a while go and challenge your assumptions and go and challenge the way you think about some other field. I had a very similar experience around SAFE. So SAFE was an area that I really, in Agile, if you're familiar with SAFE, SAFE is used by big companies, and it's a way to do Agile at scale but it's a way to do Agile at scale in a way that I always thought was just so heavy-handed and so heavyweight. And it just really felt like you lost all the benefits of Agile. I thought that way for a long time until one of the coaches at Spotify, Henrik Nieberg, went and did some stuff with Lego where they use SAFe pretty effectively, came back and taught a class for several of us on SAFe because he had come at it with the same kind of original thinking, learned about SAFe, and then saw how they used it and saw that it was effective for them. And I still not super excited to use SAFe in any of my companies, but I'm also not trying to solve the problems that many companies try and solve with SAFe. But I came away from it with a much, much better understanding and a little bit more, dare I say, respect for it. And so it was a good use of my time to actually go and learn about this thing that I honestly didn't know that much about, but didn't have good opinions of, to actually understand it a little bit better, not only to gain a better respect for it, but also to learn the rationale behind it. And maybe if I was in a situation like Lego, I might not immediately kind of reject the idea of SAFe. I might actually say, oh, you know what, this might be a problem. This might be a way to solve the problem we have. So if there's a message I'm giving, I guess, around this broader area would be, feel free to challenge your assumptions. Don't assume that you know something, even if you kind of know a lot about it, but you haven't really dug into it or haven't tried to learn it with an open mind. This chapter also is a little bit weird in that this is literally my speech. I don't give speeches. I give talks. When I give talks, I'm usually presenting with visual aids. I don't memorize them. I don't read them. I practice them so I can give them, but I give them differently every time, and I'm responding to what's in the room or what previous speakers have said. And so it's a little bit, it's not totally off the cuff. It's usually a little bit looser because of the nature of the conference I was speaking at and because of the nature of kind of what I was asked to give a speech, not give a talk. And because of that, I actually, for the first time, sat down and wrote out a speech and then stood up in front of a room at a lectern and gave the speech. And this is that speech. So that's a little bit different, obviously, than any other chapter in the book. It's also different from how I speak generally. So if it sounds a little bit more formal than the rest of my writing, that's why. It's also to a different audience than I'm normally speaking to. This was an audience of professional, kind of operational excellence people, and it was a room full of people in ties. So I'm speaking to a group of people in ties. I was wearing a tie for it. That also gives you a sense, okay, yeah, this is a little bit different. I included the speech anyway because I thought I did a reasonably good job of sort of identifying what I saw some of the value in operational excellence and then giving a good comparison and contrasting to Agile. And while also very much acknowledging why Agile wouldn't necessarily work in a lot of the contexts these people worked in, but trying to give them some of the ideas of how we were doing things that they could maybe use in some of their operational excellence practices. And so that's why this chapter reads a little different, sounds a little different, but I thought it was still valuable enough to include it. So here is chapter 25 from It Depends, Writing on Technology Leadership 2012 to 2022, transcript of my speech from OPEX Week Summer 2018. Transcript of my speech from OPEX Week Summer 2018. Originally published on August 28, 2018. Author's Note, 2023. For a brief period, I found myself welcomed into the operational excellence community. It was a fascinating insight into a world related to my work, but one where efficiency and failure avoidance were the overriding goals instead of speed and innovation. We Agilists sometimes like to deride the Six Sigma crowd, but we owe them a debt, and I appreciated learning more about their work. In the software industry today, we can change our product daily in response to direct, instantly measured customer feedback.
We can trivially give different versions of our products to different customers to see which they like more. We have figured out how to reduce the time from idea to customer value to revenue from years to days or even hours. Some of you are thinking, that would be great to be able to do that in my industry. Some of you are thinking, what a nightmare. How do you plan, track, and manage in that environment? The thing is that when I started in the software industry, it didn't work this way. We would spend months designing and planning, and we would build the new product, and we would ship it to customers, and then we would start on the next product. It would take years. If we misjudged our customers' needs, it would take us years to find out and correct the issue. For software, the revolution of the internet allowed us to break free of our old industrial manufacturing paradigms. It was a two-edged sword because the platform that enabled us to become leaner and more efficient also lowered the bar to competition. The speed of innovation is now a critical aspect of success and survival. Easy access to investment has reduced the value of efficiency to less than zero. Companies can lose money indefinitely if they can show continued growth. If we, the market leaders, become complacent, a much smaller competitor can come from nowhere and take our market away instantly. The barriers to entry are now lowered significantly. What I am describing may seem interesting, academic, or even obvious to some of you. That's nice for you, or too bad for you over in software, you might be thinking. But my industry is different. Tell that to the taxis, the automotive manufacturers, or retail. Just as we in software improved our agile and lean software development processes by learning from TPS, Deming, and the established OPEX practices and literature, we can share what we have learned back with the larger OPEX community today. This talk is short, so I'll focus on one way we've found to improve innovation velocity, an authentic autonomy culture. For me, an autonomy culture starts with Toyota and it's Kaizen. Kaizen pushes responsibility for improvement through the whole organization and puts the decision-making closer to where the knowledge is. However, the companies I know and have spoken to usually use Kaizen to make efficiency improvements to the process, not the product itself. If you want to bring more innovation into the product, you must find how to bring autonomy to more levels of the organization. Empowering teams with access to the customer, giving them the ability to perform low-risk experiments to validate their hypotheses, using data to inform their decision-making and measure their effectiveness. You are changing the model of the organization from plan, command, control to inform, inspire, measure. It's a fundamental culture shift. Leadership sets the direction and high-level strategy, and each team in the levels below figures out how they should approach their part of achieving that strategy with increasing levels of specificity. The inform, inspire, measure model was how we worked at Spotify. It is how we evolved to function at Avo, and this will be how we work at Astromue as we grow. If hiring smart people, you should take advantage of their intelligence and creativity. If you are not hiring intelligent people, you must consider why you can't trust the people you hire. For your teams to be successful, they need access to their customers. They need data. Find ways to instrument your product to give data on real-world use back to your teams. If that isn't possible, share the data from your user research, industry and market trends, user testing, competitive analysis, and product focus groups with your whole organization. Data can also help establish accountability. Work with your teams to develop objective, data-driven business metrics for which they can be uniquely accountable. Avoid vanity metrics or non-objective ones. Every team should be able to tie what they do back to the company's core business, even if what they do is support other teams. Empowering other groups to be more efficient will help drive your core business outcomes. If your company isn't data-driven today, you may need to train your teams to understand and utilize data. This training will not be a wasted effort. At Avo, we created a data-driven decision framework. We trained everyone in the company in its use. It was our version of a Kaizen card. It required the employee to validate their thinking with data and validate their decision's success or failure with data as well. Data became a central part of our processes and discussions as a deliberate side effect of this effort. Teams armed with the context they need to make intelligent decisions and tools they can use to measure outcomes objectively against the broader business goals can be given more autonomy. One more thing is needed, though, before the organization can truly embrace this model: ways to limit the risk of failure. Innovation requires failure. You can't do something genuinely new without making mistakes along the way. If we want our companies to be more innovative, we must reduce the risk of failure. Data reduces risk, but it alone isn't the answer. You need to find areas where your teams can experiment in the market in limited ways with actual customers. With rapid prototyping tools and limited run manufacturing capabilities, this has become increasingly easy over the past decade. Giving teams this ability lets them experiment and learn rapidly by giving them the knowledge they need. In turn, they can innovate without putting the whole company at risk. What of governance, compliance, oversight, quality, and process control? These things are still as vital as ever, but how they function will need to evolve in an autonomous enterprise. They must be integrated and intrinsic, part of the DNA, so that teams naturally incorporate them into their experiments. For the areas where this is most critical, the groups may need that expertise integrated into the team structure instead of externally applied. I discuss this with you as a thought exercise, a different way of approaching innovation in your organization. It is working wonders for us in the software industry. I've spoken with high street banks in the UK, large department stores in the Netherlands, multinational financial institutions, heavy equipment manufacturers, personal grooming appliance makers, and others looking into these ideas of autonomous teams to bring more innovation into their practices. If it is possible for them, then it is entirely possible for you. Thank you.
I hope that you found some value in that chapter, that you maybe got to see things in a little bit of a different light. I will remind you, please go fill out the survey. It's linked in the show notes. It's linked from itdependsbook.net. That would be really helpful to me if you would do that. I'll see you next week in the newsletter, and I'll see you 2 weeks back here for the podcast. Thanks. Have a great week.
Thanks so much for listening. Please, again, subscribe, rate, share episodes of this podcast on your favorite podcast app. Thank you for Answers to April for the music used in this podcast. To hear more from Answers to April, visit answerstoapril.com. This podcast is a production of Unit Circle Media.